Hello there, everyone. So glad to be back with our second episode of Boardroom Banter with Community Champions. And your community champions are moi, Patricia Hayes, and Danielle Cade. Hey, Danielle.
Hello, everyone.
Super excited. Hope that you have gotten to check out episode number 1. If not, you need to go do it because we were spitting fire, if we must say so ourselves. But the quick and dirty is we're joined together through a mutual friend, figured out we have so much in common when it comes to talking about nonprofit board governance that we decided we needed to have a little series and have a little conversation about it. I have over 30 years of experience serving on nonprofit boards of all sizes right here in the great state of Texas. And Danielle, tell us a little bit about your experience.
So I have over 15 years of experience in administration, 13 of which have been working with nonprofit organizations and nonprofit volunteer-led boards.
Yes, so that's the space from which we're coming from. We've dropped our bios in the links below, so you can always check out more things. But we really want to jump straight into this conversation. And today we're going to be talking about all the questions, and what are the important questions to ask before you say yes to a board service. So here's the thing. As a board member at all levels, I am a volunteer junkie, right? I own this. I admit this. I am probably known for jumping in without asking all the questions I should. And that's even after all the years. Like, I caught myself, I told Danielle, we talked about this offline, where I was still caught off by a couple of boards in recent years that I didn't ask enough questions about, but that's because I was making assumptions. So here's the thing. It doesn't matter what your years of experience are in service. Ask the questions. Be a little more thoughtful about it, especially if you're a junkie like me. And so that said, one of the first questions that you as a board member, a potential board member, volunteer or paid, it should be, what is the time and financial commitment? And those are two different things, right? Time is super important because if you have an organization that's larger with a fully developed staff, then the time commitment that you bring to the board may really focus around all of the fundraising and development and relationship building as a board. Versus if it's a smaller organization with a heavily volunteer-led board, then your time is going to be even more so, because in some aspects, dare I say, you start taking on some staffing responsibilities because of the size of the administrative staff. And so that time commitment is going to be huge, and it's really important to be clear about that up front, because the last thing you want is to get halfway in to your board service commitment and like, I can't sustain this. Like, this is crazy. This is more time than my job, because sometimes it gets that way, right? And then the second commitment is on financial, which is very important as well, because some boards have a give or get. It's becoming more so as purse strings start to tighten up. And so one of the things that a board is responsible for is helping to do the fundraising for an organization. No questions asked. The question, though, is what does that financial commitment look like? Is it supposed to be a minimal give from you as a board member versus, hey, we have commitments, of thousands of dollars, and whether you give it yourself or whether you go out and get it, that's what we ask of and we expect. So you really want to be clear about that. In all my years of service on the board, I've been on both, from working board with a lot of time to boards that have a huge staff and less time of you, to also boards that have minimal financial commitments, because you are giving so much time to those that are like, no, we clearly have like a $5,000 ask, you know, and like you need to know, because there are times when I've been asked to serve on a board, and because I am a board junkie and have so many things, I have to be mindful of what my financial commitments are going to be, because yes, you know, $1,000 over here and $500 over there, it starts adding up when you're on multiple boards. Mm-hmm. And then you're like, oh my goodness, this has become a huge financial commitment overall, right? So it's really important to ask that question going in rather than making assumptions about it. And most good, you know, directors are clear about that and have commitment forms that people know going in what those things are. Danielle, thoughts?
So, you know, we touched on it in the last one, but, you know, you'll find a couple of reoccurring themes coming from my mouth. One is ask all the questions. And two is, even if you just can give 2 hours of time a month, so long as you're clear about it, then that's great. That is 2 hours of time that helps push that board into, or that organization rather, into their vision. So it's fine. The important thing is asking those questions, being really reasonable with yourself. You know, most of the time we realize that board commitment isn't your priority, and really it shouldn't be. You know, you have your own job, you have your own life. You're caring for family and loved ones. You're doing this because you're either really passionate about whatever board you're serving on, or because you know it will help you advance in your career, you're looking to make the connections. Whatever your reason is, it most likely isn't your priority. The joy of board service is that everyone should know that. And when you're transparent and honest with yourself about how much time you can actually give, then everyone will be moving in the same direction. Sometimes it might be slower, but at least the expectations are set. In terms of financial commitment, the same is true. I have worked with boards where they didn't have a financial commitment necessarily, but they felt like it was, you know, an understanding that you should give at least something.
Yes.
And, you know, for the ones who gave nothing financially, there were definitely the ones who gave more financially who were a little bit bitter about it. You know, and it was, I should say too, most of the time when I've seen it work out well in terms of a board like that is, hey, if one person is able to volunteer more but can't give as much financially, then that's okay. Like usually, depending on the board and depending on how that commitment is written out, then normally it's fine, so long as everyone's giving something. And then some of the ones who couldn't, who perhaps didn't have as much time to volunteer, but who could donate funds, well, that's great. Like everyone's doing their part. Figuring out what your part is and asking those questions to see if there is something outlined, understood, whatever it is, it should be outlined. Is really important to making sure that you can commit to that board.
Oh yes, for sure. I mean, I know couple of things, even on the boards where there's no quote financial commitment, like a give, here's the thing, there's always a financial commitment, because there are events that you have to attend. There are things that like, oh, I'll just go run and grab that for you. Trust you me, there is going to be some type of financial commitment. It's just a question of whether it's official or not. So even if it's, like I said, let's say there's not a give or a get, but you know, you host, you know, monthly happy hours, or there's some special event that gets hosted, a gala. Galas are the common thing. And so it's like, hey, everyone's expected to attend the gala. Guess what? Those are financial commitments, because you have to pay for the ticket, for the dress, for the, parking and all of these things. There's always something. So never go into it thinking that there's not something. You really should ask, like, what are the things that we're expected to, and what are those things that are going to have a commitment as a result of it. And I just had one of my little brain farts there. There was something else I was about to say about that, but it'll come back to me. But it's just really important to think about that. Oh, you were talking about the levels of giving and what can be expected. Mm-hmm. This is when one of my boards I was on, they started doing a commitment form, and I have been an advocate for it on every board since, because guess what? It keeps everybody honest. When you're not trying to guess and figure out, well, what? If someone can only give time and connections, guess what? It's written out on that commitment form versus the person who's like, I'm about to write this $5,000 check and that's it. Like, what people are willing to commit to. And when you've asked them on this form, like, here's all the things we engage in, here's where we need our board to engage, where can you fit? And when you have that put out there and laid out, man, it makes things so much easier, because literally the board chair, the organization executive can go back to it and say, hey, here's where we're committed, here's where, everyone check your commitment forms. And also on the executive side, why it's important is when you're going to raise funds or get donors, they want to know that your board is committed to the organization. And literally so many boards these days are like, that's one of the first things that a new donor will ask is, what's your board giving commitment? And it's not about how much, it's a fact of everyone has committed something. And that's what they want to see. If there's, what is it? Is it 90% and above? Ideally it's 100. But a lot of organizations have levels what they're looking for board commitment these days.
That's very true. And, a couple of things to keep in mind. So just going on what you're saying is that it's not secret. This is a nonprofit. So the financials are available for everyone to see.
Yes.
And then especially if you're a donor-based organization, then you usually celebrate your donors to help get more. So if you're celebrating donors and it's obvious that one board member is hitting whatever milestone, and then, other board members are quiet. Like I've helped with boards where there's been like $6,000 donated, but one person donated $5,000. Well, it was pretty obvious, and what are you going to do? So, and of course we also don't want anybody in there who's thinking that they can, get one by the band. This isn't the band. This is a charitable organization.
Yeah.
So that money is going for the mission, be it to help pay for administrative fees, to help pay for galas, whatever it is.
Programming.
Yeah, exactly. So, it is, if you are volunteering on it, it really should be going towards something, and you can only give so much. That's fine, again, so long as you have that understanding. I love the idea of a volunteer commitment form. The only other thing I wanted to add is, some of you watching this might be like, well, why don't they just make stuff for board members free? If we have to go to events, why should I have to pay to, attend this symposium that I helped be on the planning committee for? That's a great question. It has to do with taxes and legalities behind it. Taxes get a lot more complicated when you say that the board gets things for free. So there's a lot of things that you just might not realize. I am a person who kind of forgets that rules. I don't realize that rules might exist. So I completely understand if you come in and you're like, why don't I get stuff for free? That would be great. But we still are operating within the legal system. And that's one of the many reasons why. You will find some boards where, yes, that is, you're reimbursed for events or for board meetings or whatever it is, but they usually have a much larger budget and they have a more complicated tax system.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good point, and it's very spelled out, right? Like especially if it's associated with your level of giving. So if there's a
Yeah.
giving society, for this association, then one of the benefits. But guess what? Danielle's right. It's being tracked through that giving society. That one of the benefits is that you get 2 tickets to this event this year. So it's not a freebie. Like it's being tracked one way or the other. And then like when you get into how you give, so I know I've been on boards where I couldn't give the cash dollar amount, but I have a, was it Liam Nielsen say, I have a specific set of skills. And I have a very specific set of skills. And so if I can use that to help the organization, I have. So in recent years, for some of my smaller organizations that really needed strategic planning, well, literally that's strategic planning consulting is one of the things that I do. And so I made that my give. And that's significant because for even a small organization, a half day strategic planning session with some follow-ups, it's easily $5,000, and they don't have that. So that's my give to the organization. And guess what? It gets tracked. Right? I literally have to invoice them and then say gratis, right? And then they say this was a board member give, so it gets acknowledged. So there are all kinds of things that get to be considered when you're doing that, but it's also one of the things you need to ask about. It's like, what, if there's some type of give, if there's a set of skills that you can offer without a conflict of interest, because there's always that, but that you can give to help the organization and it get recognized in a different way. And again, Danielle, I am a huge fan of the board commitment form. I have been an advocate for it for over 15 years now since I got introduced to it. And I'm like, every board I go to, I'm like, you have a board commitment form, right? Like I need to know. And if you don't, let's create one because it helps with everybody.
If you have a template for one, I would love to see it because
for sure.
And then one other thing too is like if you are thinking of being on a board and you're watching this and you're thinking, well, what can I give that isn't monetary, but maybe not, consulting, maybe I don't have those skills. Even if you have something like a venue, that is huge. Venues nowadays are so expensive, even in little old Cincinnati. Like you could be saving the organization $2,000 just by donating your venue for something. So just keep in mind, think outside of the box when it comes to those things. And I'm sure your board would be willing to work with you on it so long as you are asking questions and transparent.
Which takes us to, because we started bleeding into it, what type of board is it? This is huge. And we've been hinting at it because it's kind of hard not to talk about it throughout this whole conversation. But we narrowed it down to 3 major types, right? A working board, a fundraising board, and an advisory board, right? And in short, a working board is literally one of those where it's like you're expected to come in. So much of the work is actually going to be done and the responsibility of the actual board members. And like you need to know that going in because it means they're going to be a higher level ask of your time. You have to make commitments to like specific committees. And when you get on those committees, it's not just, let me just, do a brain dump on the staff and they go back and take care of it. Because guess what? There might not be a staff person to go back to take care of it. That's the whole point of a working board, right? So that's really important. And I've been on all types of boards. And one of my boards I'm on now is a working board because there's only a 2-person staff. But it has a huge mission that's education related. And so it requires a lot of people to pull it off, right? Versus a fundraising board. A lot of times when it's a fundraising board, there is generally like sufficient staff to take care of all the administrative things. But they also, it's like you're getting recruited to go bring money into the organization. Like to have access to and it's not about you personally having the money, but you having access to other people who have access to money or resources or whatever. And as Danielle mentioned, like those resources can take on varying shapes. It's not always just about cash, right? access to people with, knowledge about grants, access to venues and locations and space, depending on what type of things you're in. But fundraising board is, hey, like for a fundraising board, that commitment sheet is going to have, I am willing to go on 5 lunch and learns or, coffee chats with the ED. Right. That's literally written into the commitment, because that's what I'm going to introduce, the staff to these people that hopefully will be able to feed into it. Right. Versus an advisory board, which advisory boards, depending on where you are, is generally much more hands off. They are tapped into highly for 2 reasons: expertise or money. Right. So they want to be, or, you need them to be affiliated with the organization, but they are not going to be coming to monthly board meetings or quarterly board meetings. They're literally for the ED or the board chair to be like, hey, we need some outside input. These are people who have been affiliated with the organization and know us, so we can trust what kind of input they will provide. And then, show up, once or twice a year for a meeting, show up, to a big event a couple of times a year. And that's the level of their commitment. I've, been on an advisory board as well. Those are lovely, right? I love being able to just pop in or to take a call like, hey, we need your brain on this, be able to do that and then move along, right? It's a different level of giving. And a lot of times when you get to advisory board level, most of the time it's, again, people who have extensive backgrounds in certain things and just need to be accessed for specific purposes. So I know that was a lot in a quick thing. So Danielle, your thought about that, especially from the perspective of asking about that when you come on.
So I think that, your interpretation of them was perfect. Really, like she said, it's about asking about it, because each one involves a different ask from the volunteers. If you're on the advisory board, they're just picking your brain. It's not necessarily going to be as rewarding because you're not in there in the trenches, working on it, but you still are lending your expertise in some way. So it still is great. Like, all of these are beneficial. All of these are important. Fundraising board, again, that to me falls into what your connections are, what your time commitment is, what kind of personality what you enjoy doing. Or are you non-confrontational? Are you shy? Do you even like other people? Hey man, that's no problem. I'm an introvert too, but you know what? Sometimes you have to be a little more outgoing when it comes to asking for funds. Versus a working board. I feel like that one can be a little more diverse in terms of personalities, because every personality can lend to a different aspect of it. It all has to do with, ultimately what you want and are able to give. But these are all questions that you should be asking.
Yeah. And I just had a thought, because another good point for advisory board, sometimes this happens, is let's say that you've been on a board in another capacity, whether it's a working board or fundraising, but you have a personal commitment or you've changed jobs, your situation is shifted in some way. And so you can't continue on that board in the way that you were. A lot of times when there's someone like this and the board and the ED doesn't want to lose that person, they might ask him, hey, are you okay with shifting to an advisory board capacity? Because it allows them to stay in touch with them, to not lose them. And so that, especially if their situation shifts again and they can come back on in a larger capacity, they can, but it'll give them access to say, hey, I still respect what you bring to the table. And I would love to be able to just call you if I need some input or, an introduction, but without all the, monthly meetings, committees and all that stuff, you won't have that commitment. So they can be used in so many different ways.
Yeah, very true.
Cool. All right. So one more question for me, then the rest of them are all for Danielle, is the experience level of board members. asking this. This is the one. Oh my gosh. I know I just like let Danielle hear all the things, because this is one of those questions that I said I made assumptions about because of all my years of experience that I didn't ask as much about in recent times, in the last, like, I guess probably say 4 or 5 years, that I let slip by me because it really had never been an issue for me before. And this is one where I made wrong assumptions about the experience levels of my fellow board members, only to find out when I actually got on. And I'm thinking about one board in particular where not only was I new to the board, but I came in having been asked to serve as board chair, and only to learn that the folks on the board not only had not been on the board very long, but they did not have board experience, nonprofit board experience, period. So there were like two extremes. There were a few people that had been around for years, and this was a working board. And then you had all these other new people who had no board experience whatsoever. And that matters. Mm-hmm. Because when you're coming in, if you're making an assumption that your fellow board members all have differing levels of experience, but they have some experience, then you can come and say, okay, I can offer my piece and contribute to the process. But if everybody's new, or if everybody's old, like, you need to know, or, they've got old in types of experience, then it affects how you engage with the board and how you give, mm-hmm. right? And with the tougher piece, I dare say, being, someone with a lot of experience on a board with people with not a lot of experience, that means you get to a point where you might be feeling like you're overgiving just because the others don't even know what to ask. They don't know what to give. They don't know how it operates. Versus if you're on a board with a lot of people who are old hats at serving board service, they may help you up your game, right? And learning from. I've been on those boards as well, where I had lesser experience than some of the others, but it allowed me to sit back and learn from them. So there can be advantages to that. But coming onto a board with board members who don't have a lot of experience is tough. And mm-hmm. that's something it doesn't mean that you shouldn't do it. You just need to be aware of that. Danielle, mm-hmm. how's that played out when you've seen that happen?
Definitely the healthiest boards are the ones who are a mix of both. You ideally want someone to come into your position that you've worked so hard for. So let's say, your position has been sponsorship director, and you've worked really hard at cultivating those relationships, at, making these sponsors, yearly sponsors, wanting to donate yearly. You want someone to come in who can take that and build on it. So that really is what part of being on a board is all about. If you're coming in with nothing, with no experience, and everyone on there is on no experience, it's like working for a startup where you're just learning as you go, which isn't bad. But again, this isn't a job. This is a volunteer thing. Do you have the actual capacity to go ahead and devote to that? When you have a mix, so you have people who are mentors and people who are just coming in, you get a wonderful, cocktail of everything. You have the experience, you have the new ideas, you have people who understand the relationships outside of the board, you have people who are willing to bring in new relationships. So it really is, that is going to be the most effective board. That ultimately should be what boards want to aspire to, because you can't grow without history and you can't grow without new ideas.
Yeah, no, I agree. Awesome. Okay, here's where Danielle's like gonna give it to us. Oh my gosh. When we're talking about the leadership structure, questions when you're asking about the leadership structure. So give it to us. Danielle was like, oh my, like, I need to talk about all of these things. So give it to us, Danielle.
So you heard a little bit about it if you watched our previous episode, which had to do with I went on a tangent because roles and responsibilities, making sure that you are a suitable fit for the role. And I also went on a tangent earlier in this episode too. So, just to me, that's such an important piece. There is a place for everyone on the board. You just need to figure out where that is. And asking those questions is great. A lot of times, one of the boards that I work with, they will have they'll onboard someone on as a board member, and then they'll keep them as a really generic director at large for a few months so that that board member can understand how the board works, what's involved, and they can also see like if there's any void or if there's any gaps that they can help fill. Or not only that they can help fill, but that they want to help fill. Again, you are volunteering. This is something that you should feel passionate about. If it's not something that excites you, this goes down from being, 5th on your priority down to 15th, and nothing will happen. So making sure if you are solicited for board service and someone has a particular position in mind for you, asking questions about those positions, making sure you have the time, have the capabilities, and you have the desire to go ahead and do that. If there's open positions, so one of the boards that I assist with, they not only do the directors at large, they have almost every board has positions that they need to fill in order to be in compliance with their governance. But if there's something that you're really passionate about and you don't see on the board, ask. Just say, hey, I am really passionate about this. I think this can benefit the organization this way. A healthy board will be like, yeah, hey man, if you want to do it, run with it, like go, absolutely. Or they will tell you, and this is where like the paid staff can come in too. Hey, so we had someone in that position before, and this is why it didn't work out. So asking questions like that, and then asking, about those responsibilities. Again, desire, capacity, capability. Do you have it for all of those? Every position on a board lends to a different skill set, a different capacity. You need to make sure that you can fill that and be transparent with it. Paid staff versus volunteers, I know, is another thing for. So again, I'm paid staff. We are the history keepers. We are the keepers of your reports, data. Like we're supposed to be your one-stop shop to make your life easier because you are volunteering. So if if you have a question, if you need a little bit of guidance, we love questions. Ask all the questions. We want your life to be easier. Our field of expertise is in administration. For a lot of people, it's in board administration or nonprofit administration, general administration, project management, whatever it is. It is not in the field that you are in. So if you are volunteering on a board for a profession, if you're volunteering on a board for a passion thing, yes, ideally they would coincide, but they don't necessarily do so. So make sure you ask us the questions so that we can help you drive this mission-based organization. You make the decisions, we execute them is really how, if someone needs a really simple way of describing what my position is, that's what I say. The board makes the decisions, I execute them. Now, of course, I lend my expertise to it. I lend my, hey man, yeah, that sounds great, but that's what the boards hire me for. But just make sure you're using that. And then
put a pin in that right there. The key word: boards hire the CEO, the executive director. That's it. They do not hire the rest of the staff. That's that distinction between governance and administration. I felt the need to say that because that's always, we're going to talk about problems next time. And there's always a problem with roles, back to roles.
That's a really great thing to add in. There's so many different, hopefully one thing that you come away with as you watch these episodes is that there's so many different types of boards. And not only is like she said, working, fundraising, advisory, there's also different sizes, there's different missions that go into it. So, not everyone is going to have the same amount of staff, things like that. I specifically usually work with a board that has just one staff. That's where my expertise comes in. Or like Patricia said, like maybe they have one major staff member and then that staff member has her own assistants. Usually, if they're bigger than that, I can't say that's where I have a lot of experience in, because I'm supposed to be working. That's just my niche, is the smaller ones. But you should be asking feel free to ask us about our contracts. We'll happily tell you about our contracts because we do a lot. So for you to see spelled out everything that the executive director does is really helpful for you in terms of understanding that the executive director does a lot, but it's also helping you to see what the gaps are that you need to fill. This is why you're hiring the executive director, is because it's the day-to-day operations that you can't really trust a volunteer for, because we're not your priority, and we get it. You're a volunteer. Yeah, so that to me is just, those are the biggest things. When you see that contract, you understand it, you see where those gaps are, you ask those questions, then you'll be able to have that really symbiotic relationship with the executive director, and it will lend to a healthier board. And that's it. That ends my tangent.
Oh my goodness. And I just love this because there's so many things we come up and we've been talking about. We're like, oh my gosh, how are we going to keep this down? Because it's so rich. But I just think that kind of back and forth, like we said, between the perspective of someone who's on the board doing the service part versus a person who's like, no, I'm running this ship, and we got to keep the things going even when the board is changing constantly. But having that mix of viewpoint and coming to hey, guess what? Here are all the things that we do agree on being important. It's just a unique thing, and I'm loving it. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, I have one more thing to add on my tangent. I'm sorry.
Yes.
Not sorry. So the other thing is, when you look at that executive director contract and you see all the things that they do, one really good question for you to ask as a volunteer board member is, what happens if this board position cannot get filled? Because oftentimes what happens is, if a board position, let's say membership director, let's say that doesn't get filled, is that something that the chapter executive director, whatever it is that something that your staff is then handling? And if so, do you understand that something else will have to come off of their plate, or you'll have to pay more money for it? It is a contracted position. So if you're not fulfilling your side of the bargain, they cannot fulfill theirs. And I feel like that's another time when sometimes that relationship with the chapter executive gets a little muddled, because there's, both sides aren't understanding why they're not doing their part. So having those open communications from the beginning with your board and your chapter executive is really important.
Oh my gosh, I am so tempted to dip off into that, and I'm not going to, because I know next time we're talking about challenges, because I'm thinking of a specific situation, you and I've talked about it, where, that exact thing happened on a working board, where someone, passed away, stepped away unexpectedly, and they had a huge part. And it's like, who's going to do this now? And it's like, and nobody has an answer for it, which means then you have to pay someone, and you never allowed it for that. So
Mhm.
that's the hint and the segue
I love
to
it.
the next show, because see how this flows. I love it. I love it so much.
And I will add, for anybody watching, if you have any particular an unpopular opinion in terms of what we're saying, or if you have your own experience that you think would be interesting to share, we love stories. So feel
Yes.
free to put that in the comments, slide into our DMs. We're all for it.
Oh, for sure, for sure. Because we think we think there's something going here, so it might be. Don't be surprised if you might get a call later on about a follow-up episode or something. So thank you all for sure for joining us today. Again, as Danielle stated, drop your comments, drop your thoughts. If there's something, a question you have, and you don't want to put, in the open comments on whatever platform, then just slide into our DMs. We're happy to follow up. And we will be coming up with episode number 3 next, where we are going to be talking about those head in the sand moments, God help us, where we start talking about the challenges, those common challenges in nonprofit board service. And man, we all have stories there.
Spoiler alert. Expectations versus reality is the first bullet point on that outline.
and Danielle is going to start that conversation. All right. Okay. Thanks so much, everyone, for joining us. We'll look forward to seeing you next time. Take care. Bye-bye.